Hi,
So,
welcome everybody. We're starting our Prayojana series of 7th one. Today we have Dr. Dino Prado. Let me see if I can. Dino Prado, naturopathic physician, founder and CEO of Envita Medical Center, and also founder of Vertus Custom Pharmacy and Unipathic Medicine. He's an innovator, pioneer, entrepreneur, and integrative medicine specialist who have done amazing things in the complex disease area of cancer, regenerative medicine, Lyme disease, and other things that normally it's very hard to treat. He also stumbled into kind of ended up starting to treat a lot of COVID patients just because of the and preventative measures for COVID. And he's going to share some of the things that he have in the works and he has experienced. Dr. Daniel Stein is a professor of at the Department of Medicine and specialized in metabolic and endocrinology, chair of Institutional Review Board, and he was working in the COVID frontline and also involved heavily into the research side at Einstein School of Medicine and Montefiore Medical Center in the Bronx, New York. And as usual, we have Dr. Joyce Grossman, infectious disease, pediatrics, internal medicine, 3 masters in immunology, cell biology, genetics, biochemistry. She has population health insurance background as the former CEO of a health plan responsible for multiple lives in multiple states, and also as the head of research and population health here at Globex Health. Dr. Adasilva Okasanya is a family medicine physician, virtual care expert, COVID-19 frontline. She leads Globex Health's team of post-acute and virtual care program. She will be moderating. Myself, I'm Juby George-Waze. I'm the CEO and Chief Innovation Officer of Globex Health. Because of all the different people involved, we have a little bit of a longer disclaimer today. So this is a very informational, only educational, informational. There is no medical advice here. You will need to deal with go to your doctors or individual cases to look for medical advice if there is any need. Additionally, this is some of the things that Dr. Prado has as a disclaimer. He does have relationship with 3 or 4 entities, and those are Envita Medical Center, Vertus Custom Pharmacy, and Unipathic Medicine and Personal Next. There are different relationships inside between all the parties involved. Dr. Stein may or may not be doing some IRB work on some of the things that Dr. Prado has going, and there might be other relationships. So just wonder, nothing that is negative or financially oriented or hidden. We still don't know what some of all those relationships are. COVID-19 resources, as usual, we will recommend some of them that for you to reach out on your own and research. CDC, World Health Organization, National Governance Association has state by state downstream of what's happening in each state, and clinicaltrials.org. Today, we're going to be talking more on the examples of potential integrative and alternative solutions, specifically from Dr. Prado's experience and Dr. Stein's experience. Introduction and updates, some stats, skeptics' path to integrative and alternative medicine, barriers to challenges, immunity enhancers. Those are all going to be by Dr. Prado as part of his already prepared presentation. What is working and where, medical pharmacological compound pharmacy, and other. Quick stats. We are at 21 million global cases, 776,000, that's 250,000, over 250,000 in deaths. United States leads at 5.4 million in test cases and 171 in deaths. What I would like to mention, and we're going to dive a little bit deeper in, is that Brazil being second, and it's got 108,000 deaths, while India being third with 2.7 million, which is close to 3 million. Very closer to Brazil, but only like at a 51,000 death. So somehow they're able to lower their death rate. COVID numbers by state, just that. Deaths by county, Queens and Kings County being Manhattan are the 2 largest ones still, and then the numbers in the pink are the higher numbers. So we still having some number spikes, but not as bad. This is just stats from India because so I am from India, and we just started looking at it because the difference is there are a little bit more less death and more being recovered. So of the 2.7 or 3 million confirmed, and then they have about 2 million recovered and only 50,000 deaths. So for that reason, I'm going to slightly look at some of the things that's being used in India. Prevention is better than cure, because if you don't get sick and if you're able to prevent it, then that's the better option. So we want to mention that inside the NIH right now, the national in the infectious disease area, Dr. Fauci's area is leading it, but there is another area that I want to mention, National Center for Complementary and Integrative Medicine, that looks at Chinese medicine, that looks at naturopathy, that looks at other things. So we want to mention that there are other things out there that has been in use for thousands of years, and there are other ways of working it, because we all had a friend, we're still having a front row seat to our broken healthcare system and why it's not working. So some of the things that's being used in India, this is the government mandated. They set this out saying what you can do every day in your life. And they're all used to doing these simplistic things to improve immunity. So those are just given to the people and just conveyed so that they can take their own personal choices. As far as I know, we have not had any kind of that kind of designations. These are the things you should do pretty much every day so that you can boost your immunity overall. And they're doing that at a national scale. So it might be possible, I do not know if that is the reason the number of deaths are less and more people are recovering. This is just the clinical trial, the number of clinical trials going on in globally. The World Health Organization in the US also have a tracker. The reason I said I wanted to take you through that piece is of the studies, about 3,000 studies going on. There are about 3 to 4 going on with quercetin. That is one of the things that Dr. Prado is going to be going into detail. And you'll be asking, what is quercetin? I would hand that over to Dr. Prado to explain it further. But I just want to show, this is the World Health Organization's clinical trial. They have 2,115 studies going on. Again, you can see that vitamin D3 and acetylcysteine, there's some quercetin, all these things, some of the things that Dr. Prado is going to be mentioning, and Dr. Stein. So one of them is just Ayurvedic. So in India, this is being tried out, and they have alternate option to hydrochloroquine, azithromycin. They have found other interventions. So I just wanted to mention that it's out there, it's being used, and it is being successful. With that in mind, I want to hand this to Dr. Prato. Here you go. I'm going to stop sharing, Dr. Prato, and take over.
All right, just give me a minute. Let me see if I can get this to share the screen. Okay. Is everybody, can you see the screen? Are you able to see it?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, pleasure to meet you. I'm Dr. Prado. I'm a naturopathic physician in Scottsdale, Arizona. We've been running our medical center with focus on oncology, integrative oncology, for the last 20 years. We have a team of about 150 people on our team. So you'll be happy to know we have MDs, DOs, and naturopaths working together. The state of Arizona is very particular in that we have a very large scope of practice in naturopathic medicine, larger than other states. So if you're in New York or New Jersey, you might think, wow, these are the guys that just use essential oils and herbs. But in Arizona, they have a really strong and they're used. We have, I'll go through this presentation, and this presentation I'm sharing with you, we actually sent to the White House. We spoke with, and Dr. actually Stein was on the call with me. We spoke to Jay Sekulow, which is one of the attorneys for Trump, and the goal was to forward this to Mike Pence so that they would have access to this data. Quercetin, as you'll go through here, is a flavonoid. We'll talk all about that briefly, but we have been using various versions of phytotherapies in our compounding pharmacy. So our compounding pharmacy is unique in that, unlike a hospital, we don't just mix agents, we actually make IV medication. That includes chemotherapy drugs, antibiotics, a lot of other meds, but we also do a lot of phytotherapeutic and integrative agents. So everything from methylene blue, which somebody from your team contacted us on, all the way to melatonin IV, to resveratrol, quercetin, curcumin. So we have a lot of data and many years experience using these agents. So I'm gonna share with you. And then what we did, so let me just get started here. You guys saw the disclaimer. Basically, this is not an advertisement of any kind to sell any agent. This is a medical conversation amongst physicians to communicate. And I just want to make it clear that our drug is not FDA approved, and it's just available through compounding pharmacy under dietary monograph. Quercetin is a safe agent, and the dietary monograph's been around for a long time. We published, before I get started, and I can share this all with you, so we can actually just send you my link so you can go through this. These are the in vitro protocols. I'm going to just, because I know how, we have a big team of docs. Everybody always asks me, what's the protocol? So up front, we can send you this document. This is what we've done with our patients. You're welcome to look at it. That's because always people ask me about what we're doing. The other thing is we published a case history not too long ago, and that's available right here. So this is what I'm going to kind of talk about tonight. Is we took this case back in late March, early April, and then what we did is we documented this case of a 59-year-old male, and I'll go through this kind of quickly, but you can get a copy of this paper. I like to publish in open journals so people don't have to pay to get to them, and physicians can open them up and take a look at them at their own convenience. And I'll share this paper with you as well, and then kind of go through this so you can see kind of like our work and what we've done. And then I'll come back to that so you can take a look at that. So let's get started. So quercetin is a bioflavonoid, and I can send you this presentation so you can watch it on your own. But here's a great summary for quercetin. Quercetin is a plant. It's made from a plant, typically onions and apples, right? And if you eat quinoa, any of you healthy, hopefully you're on plant-based diets, which are really good for longevity. Quercetin is a very powerful flavonoid, and it has activity against cancer. So mainly we're a cancer clinic. We're not a COVID clinic, or infectious disease. We don't really do a lot of family medicine. We work on late-stage cancer patients. What we found early on is when we took quercetin, nebulized it in patients that were on PD-1 inhibitors that developed pneumonitis and some of these other complications when they were on these immunotherapy oncology drugs, quercetin prevented the pneumonia, the inflammation and the respiratory symptoms in these patients in pneumonitis. They didn't develop it. We also learned early on, years using quercetin orally for several decades, it worked really well for allergies or anybody who has mast cell, inflammatory reactions. So this is a nice little diagram our team developed, and this little unipathic symbol is our educational platform. We have about a couple thousand physicians we service through our pharmacy, and we do online education for infusion care. So like a lot of your integrative agents, IV agents, how to combine these. And so this comes from there. So here you can see it has antioxidant properties. So what we liked about quercetin's mechanism of action is you'll learn that it's very similar to hydroxychloroquine in that it's a zinc ionoform, right? And we know zinc impairs replication of viral replication, but quercetin has other side benefits that make it kind of neat, right? You have cardiovascular benefits here, neurodegenerative, antioxidant benefits, anti-inflammatory, which is really good when you talk about phase 2 or cytokine storm potentially, works well there. You have an antiviral activity. And we'll look at that. It has it's really good. So we use it with PIK3 as a PIK3 inhibitor, tyrosine kinase inhibitor. Works really well in oncology. We mainly use it intravenously, even more than nebulized. And we combine that with chemotherapy genetic targets. We use it, it's cardioprotective. And you can see here it has other benefits as an antioxidant. So quercetin, and by the way, this little document I just sent to Judy We can forward it to you, so you can go through this on your own. I don't want to bore you reading off of this. I want to talk about clinical cases, and after a long day, I'm kind of all tired. Here's a nice diagram I want you to take a look at. So this is quercetin studied for influenza as an antiviral infect. You'll see that as the quercetin dose went up, look, on your left, you'll see 0, 25, 50. As the dose goes up, guess what happens? You start getting less viral particles, right? So visibly here, you can see at the higher concentrations how quercetin has an antiviral replication action, and that's with influenza. And the other thing that's interesting with quercetin on its own is that it has this inhibitory action on a number of viruses, but it also has, as you'll see here, this zinc ionoform property, which is huge because that's what attracted me to even trying this with our first COVID patient. Patient flew back from New York, came and visited Dr. Stein, got coughed on. No, just kidding. He came back from New York, and he was with his son and helping him move in. And all of a sudden he gets home. He's like sick for a week, got a flu, calls us up. He's like, oh, I can't breathe really well. We're like, oh, I think you need to get to the ER and get some x-rays. Got there, they put him on hydroxychloroquine and zithromycin, typical protocol, and you'll see that in our study. But then when he got home, he still couldn't breathe. He had a drowning sensation in the lungs. We nebulized him with our Quercetin, which is this quercetin N-acetylcysteine formula, and boom, and you'll see this case after case. After 30 minutes of nebulizer, now we see it around 20, 30 minutes, their breathing gets better, a lot better. And within 2 to 3 treatments, their breathing almost returns. Within the second day, this guy was building a gym in his garage. So we thought, wait a minute, is this just a one-off, or is this the potential mechanism of this drug working on COVID? So we obviously continued using it, and we didn't have to even have patients come into our clinic. We would just send this the drug. And we got to the point where we just said, let's not even give hydroxychloroquine. Let's just give Quercetin because it's got a similar mechanism and no side effects, and it still worked very well. And we'll go into that. So, but it's you'll see these polyphenols have a lot of anti-inflammatory, antiviral properties. You'll even see some of these properties if you're familiar, you've ever heard of Respiratory. High concentrations, not enough to drink red wine and get that mechanism. You need to get higher concentrations, but it has similar mechanisms. And so how does it work? Well, some of the data shows quercetin doing a number of different things that allow it to work on other viruses such as SARS, and you'll see MERS and all these others that it was actually studied on. And I'll come back to the slide, but there was a group out of Canada, and I remember pulling this data. They were studying quercetin for MERS and SARS, and they were working with another group out of Europe where they were doing these studies for the mechanisms of actions of quercetin and how it could be effective antiviral. So here's a potential diagram that talks about the kinase, the transcription activity in the viral genome and how it's potentially not only blocking inflammation, but actually also affecting the mitochondrial antiviral response, which is quite interesting. And there are several ideas behind its interrupting viral replication, being anti-inflammatory. So it has multiple mechanisms of action that are of interest to this particular infection. And then here you'll see it's a potent antiviral, inhibits viral replication. This is just published right from the studies. We just pull them right off the study. So it gives you kind of like a summary. And so the question you might ask is, what's the efficacy of doing a nebulized quercetin? Early on, when we were talking about nebulizing quercetin, and I was talking to Dr. Stein, the big worry in the hospital was all of a sudden, if they would have allowed the study, which it hasn't happened, if the patients were to breathe this in, and then they would breathe it out, right? It's going to spread everywhere. Everybody's terrified of a nebulizer, right? There was like fear of airborne particulate. It's like so send them outside. That's what we did. Put them on the patio or in the backyard, and the treatment takes about 10 to 15 minutes tops, and it works very well. And what you'll see is that there's been a lot of other studies done with quercetin as an inhaler or as a nebulizer, and showed efficacy. Now, in our own clinic, we've done hundreds of these, so we know the safety data. Clinically, we felt comfortable using it. We've been using it in oncology. Here's another diagram. These diagrams are great. We'll forward this to you if you want to, if you have free time, you want to look at this stuff. But here's another diagram on the mechanism of quercetin seen in asthma, which is interesting, right? Look at that Th1 to Th2 cytokine production. Look at the macrophage. So you get an immune modulation. You get reduction in mucus production. That's interesting, right? Because that's a big factor when we're dealing with, you know, R's and particularly people who are in respiratory distress. Airway hyperactivity inhibits mast cell, reduces collagen deposit. And what we found, and you'll see in the protocol, we used to say 14 days. We think 10 days is good now. You just will find on your follow-up imaging, you'll have no fibrosis. You'll see no scarring in the lungs and when you use this nebulizer, which is really cool, which was of real interest to us because we thought this was going to do a lot of lung scarring where people would have prolonged damage. But with this protocol, we've seen so far prevent that. And here's the anti-fibrotic activity on fibrosis. So these diagrams are made from a series of summary papers, and that way you can see like all the mechanisms really quick, right? And then you can go and read the papers on your fun time. Mast cell stabilizer. Take a look at this diagram. Inhibits the recruiting of mast cells, which is important, right? That's part of that cytokine storm we talk about, is how you're going to get this strong cascade of cytokines. Quercetin shuts that down. It does it in a very, so it's antihistamine. If you've never used this, by the way, orally, very good for allergies. And nobody typically has reactions with quercetin. It's a very favorable drug to use. You usually don't see people have reactions with it or side effects with it. And they usually find that when they take it, it takes about a couple, 2-3 weeks, and then their allergies go away. They don't need medication anymore because they're stabilizing mast cell histamine release. Pretty neat. It works really nicely with stinging nettles. If any of you are into herbals, stinging nettles is a nice anti-inflammatory, and the two complement each other very well in allergies. So here was that. I'm not going to play this for you because I don't know if it plays over Zoom, but this was the Canadians meeting with the Chinese in the use of doing quercetin clinical trials in Wuhan back when this all started a long time ago. It seems like a lifetime ago when all this media was coming through. And so they already had begun doing this work. And when I saw this news piece, I was like, okay, this is great. So it's not just me, this crazy idea we have, but it's happening in other clinical research. So one thing we thought, which was really great to pair quercetin with in Quercenex, is N-acetylcysteine. Mucomist. I mean, right? N-acetylcysteine's been around. It's a World Health Organization drug, very good to breaking down mucus. But interestingly enough, let me just speed through this a little bit. Take a look at N-acetylcysteine's mechanism of action. TNF-alpha, IL-6, cytokine. Look at all the down inflammatory regulations of NAC. Very safe again. N-acetylcysteine's like benign. You know, you're going to get increased production of glutathione, which is good for cytokine storm, oxidative damage to the lungs. What I love about these agents is not that you couldn't do other meds, right? But these are so gentle. You just typically don't see adverse events with these kinds of drugs. I mean, people can have allergies to anything, but you just don't see it. And what you'll see that I found very interesting is respiratory syncytial virus, and you'll see how N-acetylcysteine improved the effectiveness of other medications. So when we added it to the formula, we used it. We used the formula. Sorry, my phone went off. We used the formula to enhance the mechanism of quercetin, but also what we wanted to do is get further mucus to clear, especially as people are getting that more and more fluid buildup. And acetylcysteine does a great job of thinning the thick mucus, right? Think of the alveoli getting suffocated with all that thick mucus. Well, NAC is just wonderful at making that less viscous and getting that to expectorate. And that's what you'll see in treatment is people will, if they have a lot of mucus, they'll start coughing it up, which is good. They do it outside, not in the house. And they'll sometimes increase their sneezing for the first few treatments, and then they notice their breathing is improving. So I believe that's part of the N-acetylcysteine mechanism. And this RSV study, what's interesting is this Quercenex got my attention potentially. We haven't thought of this, but it may be really nice for all these pediatric pneumonias and adult pneumonias after this COVID's gone. We don't know, but we think what a great thing to have to, work if other meds are not working, or use it as an adjuvant. You can use this along any other medication protocol you put together. There's no adverse events with other antivirals. There's no, with other, even if you do a steroid, you're not going to have adverse events if you spread it apart even by like an hour or so. This is N-acetylcysteine's mechanism. And I wanted to show you this because this talks about oxidative damage. You know, one of the things we talk about when there's infections or other conditions is the amount of free radical damage or inflammatory damage that's done to tissue. Well, NAC, as you know, right, acetaminophen poisoning works really well for liver metabolism, glutathione, and works really nice here. Intravenously, as a side note, if you're using N-acetylcysteine to build glutathione, you could add selenium, right, because it's also a glutathione builder. And you could also, in that, use combinations with ascorbic acid, which if you're doing any IV care in your practice could do, even as a preventative for patients who are weaker. Because as you get older, your GI absorption is not as good as when you're younger. Gastrointestinal absorption goes down. People have, you know, higher risk for B12 deficiencies, other nutrient deficiencies. And sorry I have to bring this up, but as a naturopath, we focus on these dietary health pieces. And NAC makes a wonderful adjuvant in the IV formulas. Okay, so we combined the two and we added a molecule. Let me see if I can get to it. This is the logistics of Quercetin. I'll go to this in a minute. Let me scroll down and see if it's on one of my slides. So we added cyclodextrin. Cyclodextrin is a gamma cyclodextrin makes a wonderful nanoparticle. So it takes this quercetin and gets it inside, sits right inside these little donut holes, right? And it helps it to absorb deeper into the tissue. So your bioavailability for the quercetin goes way up versus just trying to nebulize it because it's not very soluble in water, right? So this plays a big role in making it more soluble. And in fact, we haven't been asked to do this, but if we were ever asked, and by the way, when we talked to the White House and I sent information back, we said, we'll give this to you free. We don't want to make money on this. We'll give it to you. If it works, give it to people. God bless them. We want to heal people. This wasn't like we're trying to, you know, come up with some great invention and capitalize on it. But what's nice about cyclodextrin is the shelf life of this refrigerated is about, you know, on and off around 2 years. But when you lyophilize it, you can store it at room temperature. And the vial would just be, you know, you just would use like a saline, right? Bring it back and then you could infuse it. So it would have a very long shelf life if such a demand became necessary, which I'm not holding my breath. It looks like no one's looking for good treatments today. Everybody's just looking to get this nonsense political garbage that's going on. I'll leave that to myself. All right, so from the pharmaceutical industry, cyclodextrin is well known. It's used as a carrier in other agents. It's already been used in other pharmaceutical drugs that are out there. So it's not brand new to this, and it's used to increase bioavailability, okay? So we got interested in these protocols, and so we basically went ahead and let me see if I can pull this case history up here. We went ahead, and I'll pull this up. We went ahead and we published this. So I was on the phone with, I think, Daniel. We were talking to Tammy in Florida. And this was a nice lady who's connected to like every doctor. So she got me in charge of somebody who was in charge of like the healthcare of Florida. He was like government guy over there. I said, here, take this, use it. He says, no, publish a case study. And then even Dr. Stein said it might be helpful for me to have it over here for if we do a case study. So we quickly published the study, as quick as that is. You know, it takes forever for these things to get done. Mm-hmm. Basically, what we found was in this one patient, let me outline that, it wasn't a large cohort, a 59-year-old male with these respiratory symptoms that I explained earlier, did the treatment, and boom, they recovered really quick. But then succinctly after that, every patient that called us, we would basically courier over the nebulizer to their house because we didn't even have to see them. We just let we have a courier service that can run it right to the patient's house. They would nebulize almost indefinitely, 20 to 30 minutes. I'm breathing better. Second treatment in the midday, 3 times a day, TID treatment, better. Within 2 to 3 days, respiratory was a nothing burger. In fact, to the point where we had ER doctors who didn't even know what we were doing, calling patients saying, you need to come in, because let me just say this testing thing we're doing is ridiculous. We are way testing unnecessary cases, irrelevant. I mean, who cares if you're positive or negative? What I care about is you don't go into respiratory distress and you don't die. That's all I'm interested in. I want to save your life. I'm not interested whether you got COVID or whatever you have. And so what I'm saying is we oftentimes hold back on therapy before we get a test back, and you got a 2-day lag time, 3 days, especially where we are at. And so we got to the point where we just mandated no testing, start treating. And we didn't know. I mean, it came to the point where we didn't know, because we had treated like prophylactically in the clinic, we'd done over 100 and something therapies. And then we treated a number of patients outside the clinic. We had good results. We reached a point where there was waiting lines at the CVS pharmacy for testing, garbage everywhere. We just said, we don't have in-office testing. We'd have to send it out to LabCorp. So we would send the test out, but we'd start treating right away. We wouldn't wait. It was stupid to wait, because we don't want people to get to, especially with an oncology patient base, you don't want them to get into any kind of respiratory distress. And it successfully helped everyone that we treated. We had no, and we even had some cases that were technically not COVID. I want to argue whether I trusted the testing or not. That's another story, but they all did well. And so this case, what really got my attention, and you can read this, we'll send you the paper, you can read all the details of the case, and you can see you know, the age of the patient, the gender, all that, you know, we had to put the socioeconomic, apparently that was important to the publisher, and, you know, where they came in with, but you can see here that, you know, his clinical signs in care, if you look here, I don't know if I can zoom this on my picture, but when you look at his post chest x-rays, which I believe that were done about 15 days after the case, he's clear. I mean, there's nothing there. There's no fibrosis, no scarring. And we saw that continuously with every patient we treated after that. So I welcome you to go read about this case. It breaks everything in detail. I don't want to bore you with it, but you can see that you can look at the images, the vitals, the protocol we gave him. And then we talk about, let me see if I can pull this up. It's always hard to do this over Zoom, but you can see that in addition to the nebulizer, we add the oral adjuvant care. Now, there's some discussion on whether quercetin is efficacious just orally, because it may not be therapeutically enough to help the patient. But about it, was it Dr. Stein, I remember 2 weeks ago, I got a call from a doctor in Florida who had a patient. He was a nephrologist, MD nephrologist, who was working with some kid who had COVID, who was asthmatic, high risk. He had tried steroids, nothing was working on him, and he put him on oral quercetin. He calls me, he finds our paper we published, he gets in touch with me, so I call him back, and he says, we got to go on the news and tell everybody about this quercetin, it's amazing. He goes, I gave him an oral quercetin, and he said, it was like, it must have been when penicillin was discovered, because it worked so quick on this kid. And I said, great, but we're not going on the news. I said, I'm not going to be any part of getting on any kind of media. We're happy to share the results. But quercetin works really well with zinc because it's a zinc ionoform. And even in the earliest time I can remember, back in March and April, maybe that's not true for New York, but out here, the ER docs were clueless about zinc being used with hydroxychloroquine. They just didn't know. It was like, just give. So I had patients that would call, they were in the hospital, and I'm like, order a steak, get whatever you can to get your zinc. You don't have to have a lot of zinc in your system. You just don't want to be zinc deficient because it's the mechanism of action. And so for a zinc ionoform, it's good to have zinc in the body. 30 to 50 milligrams, I'm even saying you can go less. I think you could go 15 to 20 if you're on it every day. Because you don't want to over zinc your body. You'll throw, you know, I mean, you don't need to, sometimes you think a little bit of more of something. If you have an active infection, maybe I would up that dosing. But for somebody who has a minimal, exposure, or, they're just preventative, I wouldn't mess around with it. I just give, 15, 20 milligrams a day. You can do zinc twice a day. Just to make you feel better, if this helps you, my mother's been on zinc for 20 something years, 2 a day. And I'm glad she has, because her, breast cancer, 0, ovarian cancer, 0, quercetin is very powerful preventatively. I like these particularly these phytotherapeutics such as quercetin and resveratrol and ginseng. All these have very good data on miRNA. I recommend people just take them because they're cheap. It's like 20 cents a pill. And if you need a physician brand, we will not sell it to you, but I'll connect you with with Alan Zapp, who is the owner of Thorne Nutraceuticals. Have you ever heard of Thorne? It's one of the largest nutraceutical companies. He developed a new company called Tesseract, and they have a really nice I think Dr. Stein has been using it, but it's a time release. and also a quick release quercetin. And it also has cyclodextrin, so it enhances the bioavailability. So you could use that orally. And I think that's a great prophylactic. If you do a little oral zinc and a little quercetin, you put anybody over the age of, let's call 45, with any high risk on this formula, it'll cost them nothing. I have seen more laboratories become filthy rich during this COVID period than ever before. They've quadrupled their revenues, $100 a test. We're testing everybody. And it's ridiculous because you're negative today, positive tomorrow, contact tracing. Just put people on a little bit of quercetin and zinc. Go out and get a little bit of vitamin D in the sunlight, and it's going to reduce the mortality significantly, in my personal opinion. And I don't make any money on that. I mean, I'm not trying to generate revenue on sending you to some kind of, local grocery store, but these are inexpensive tools, and it's sad that
Dina, Dr. Prado, I'm just going to throw it in. We were looking at the numbers today. As of the last week, there were over 63 million tests being done. It may be on the same pair of people.
How big is the American population? Like 350
American
million?
people population is somewhere between 300 and 400 million, I believe. So they had 63 million, and then the reimbursement is somewhere between 25 to 45 just on the test. But the swab, the components, all that adds up to about $100. So multiply 63 million times 100 plus is where the profit margin is going on the testing.
Well, yeah, I mean, one lab I know that's a government-based lab quadrupled its annual revenue in a few months and have hired people like mad just for this COVID testing. Because it's the people who have the genetic sequencing equipment that really can move, right? Because they already have all the data and they're already set up, so they can just pump them out. And they are, honestly, it's crazy. But I digress, because
I wouldn't mind asking Dr. Stein just to elaborate a little bit on what Dr. Prado mentioned about you taking the Tesseract version of this quercetin.
Sure. So anyway, first of all, let me introduce myself. So I've had the pleasure of meeting Juby over the phone and Aki, and I've had a lot of conversations with Dino as we were trying to plan how to move things forward and treat early and even prevent. We'll discuss more of that. Dino has been beautifully set up to do that, and it's always a pleasure to hear the kinds of things he's doing. I'm at Montefiore, so we're a very conventional medical center. So I was pulled in for my job as a professor of medicine, an endocrinologist. I'm actually chairman of the IRB. But I was mobilized just like everybody else to the front lines, and it was an extremely emotional, but I have to say satisfying experience. But the greatest frustration was not being able to offer treatments. And you were seeing people die like crazy. The Bronx, where I'm located, had the highest mortality rate of any area in the United States. And at the peak, we had 2,300 patients with COVID in the hospital. Essentially, nobody with anything else was in the hospital. And the healthier people would go to the ICU. They still had a 55% mortality. Those who they kept on the floors. So we were managing people on ventilators on the floors. That was essentially death sentence, 95% mortality. So let me just sort of go over and describe what we were doing conventionally, and then I'll sort of segue. Or Dino, are you finished? Because I don't want to step on what you.
I'm fine. I'm done. I can answer questions.
Dina,
I don't want to take
before you close, Dina, would you mind going through the ENAC and a few alternate other IV options that you have?
Yeah, I mean, also we can email this to you so you can look at all the IV care. I mean, you can see here we've done
that slide, that particular slide.
Peroxide IV, which some of you would cringe, but I've used this for in our integrated community over 30 years. Ozone IV, we've done glutathione, quercetin. I mean, you don't even need a colloidal silver, which got a lot of negative press, but the Keith from American Biotech has a fabulous, very simple product. Even it showed I think when you guys did that benchwork data in the hospital, Daniel, it was like 85% kill rate just on the gel. And of course, so anyways, here's some formulas. These are IVs we use. You're welcome to look at these. These are just osmolarities already calculated. You can see all these agents that are integrative, that are immune modulatory. I don't know if I had anything to say about how this disease was treated. I would reiterate what you just said. Daniel, is I would have been pre-treating these people way before watch and wait. Watch and wait to me is ridiculous. It's like watching and waiting when somebody has a cancer. Early detection.
I mean, to this day, the FDA says there is no approved treatment, so they don't recommend anything. It's insanity. And for those physicians on the front line who presumably have experience and have strong opinions on what is helpful to their patients, the FDA is basically saying, no, you really shouldn't be doing that. It's truly politicized insanity, in my opinion.
We wanted to bring up a question, maybe Dr. Grossman can mention, you know, out of the things that you're sharing, Dr. Prado and Dr. Stein, do you see, you know, one of the things we see as early 9/11 survivors and seeing some of the downstream effect is this post-COVID syndrome where there's a mental fog, extreme fatigue, post-traumatic syndrome on ICU patients, and a lot more cardiac, renal, liver, and all that. So some of the things that you're sharing, are there any components that could be used there too, or Quercetin NAC itself, or other things?
Well, I haven't treated any post-COVID patients who have mental fogginess. We've treated quite a few tick-borne infection patients who have those type of conditions, and they respond really well. Part of it is, you know, we don't know enough about this infection or how it impacts the central nervous system. We know it does. So part of it will be, in my opinion, immune modulatory. Part of it might also be elimination of byproducts of the infection, which, again, I'm not an expert on COVID. I honestly can't speak to that. But strategically, I would look at people's methylation, their ability to metabolize, eliminate, help. The body has an interesting ability to heal itself, in my opinion, when you give it the things that it needs. And I think that's something we always overlook from a clinical perspective. But if you can get things that have blood-brain, like ascorbic acid IV has ability to pass the blood-brain barrier very nicely. There's a lot of other agents we use with DMSO and other shuttling agents to help with brain activity. But to that extent, anything that has antioxidant properties is going to help people with energy. But also, you have to remember that some of these people were sick before they got COVID. So you're also dealing with their metabolic syndromes, hypertension, glucose, and those are all going to slow down healing. If you can get those parameters under control with good dietary lifestyle, nutritional changes, everything else you do is, in my opinion, is going to respond better. So I'll just leave it at that.
I'd agree. I do want to emphasize that the patients who we saw hospitalized who did poorly and those who died, invariably they had some other complicating condition. Almost always they were severely overweight and or obese. Diabetes is very common having underlying heart disease and hypertension. And in the Bronx, 60% of the whole population is vitamin D deficient. And in the group we were looking at, it was essentially 100%. And we know that vitamin D is among the other things, even though that's quote unquote more middle of the road. And yet my colleagues were not consistently treating with vitamin D. They were consistently treating with zinc. I mean, I was on the wards telling everybody should be on vitamin D, they should be on vitamin C, they should be on zinc. And that was the little I could do. Because some of these other things we're talking about were just not something the pharmacy stocked, and it's not something that you could recommend as an outpatient. Well,
just to let you know,
more flexibility.
No good deed goes unpunished. Dr. Marcola, who some of you know from the website, and I know him, he got racked really hard by FTC for vitamin D. All he did was bring on docs to talk about vitamin D levels, and they just, he's right now, FTC's frozen everything he's doing. He's got legal battles because of discussing vitamin D. I don't know where we've gotten to.
Well, there's a First Amendment right to do that. And in fact, Pearson versus Shalala, this is a famous lawsuit. The FDA was trying to shut down the supplement manufacturers. Now, if you talk to Alzap, there were some abuses, but nonetheless, most people are good actors who try to do a good thing and a good product. And he fought the FDA and he won, not by allowing it to go through the regulatory pathway, but on First Amendment grounds. And he said, I'm quoting the scientific literature. You can't prevent me from telling the truth. And the scientific literature, by definition, is sort of the accumulated truth of the scientific community, and he won.
The first thing we got from our American Association of Naturopathic Physicians, which went out to thousands and thousands of doctors, is do not comment or talk about COVID on anything, on any online webinar or anywhere, because FTC has made it very clear that they are focusing on any. Now, I'm against anybody making claims, but talking about vitamin D and immunity to me is, you know, or vitamin C, I mean, most physicians I would assume know this. And maybe, and he was talking about on his shows, which I didn't get to hear all of them, but people that have better vitamin D exposure, they're in areas and regions that have sunlight, have less incidences of death. And so he's putting some of that together. I think that there is, without a question, even Dr. I was talking to Joyce earlier, there's some political stuff going on here, and it's very ugly. It has nothing to do with helping patients and doing what's right as a physician. And frankly, I'm a bit disgusted by it. And I feel like physicians need to stand up and say, we are going to sue you, even though we can't, but for the practice of medicine, we have the right to communicate with people. We absolutely do. The practice of medicine is our protection, you know, and we have the right to use what we think will help our patients, whatever that might be.
Yeah, I'm Dr. Kalasa here. I just want to add something. How are you, everybody? Of course. Regarding talking about vitamin D and C, the point that we have, those doctors, when they talk about it and they talk about immune boosting, they don't talk about the mechanism, how it is immune boosting, because those people in regulatories, they are lawyers, okay, and they have no clue in medicine. And if you don't challenge them, as you said, by articles, and I think the doctor who went by articles and by science, and also associate himself with academies, and he's publishing articles and things like that. You know, very, very important that the FDAs and regulatories, they do like the doctor who is associated with universities or have publications, because they feel that whatever he say is being approved by a medical community. So really, they don't have much of say, or they cannot put them down. But if you have a doctor say, well, it's causing immune boosting, but he doesn't come up with the mechanism, and then when they challenge him with the letter, he does not respond, then that's where they start.
Yeah, it basically comes down to structure function claims with FTC. So you can talk, as you're right, you can talk about structure function, but you cannot talk it in relationship to disease. Again, but my argument for all these doctors would be, when we're talking amongst each other, this is not a patient, right? We all know how to read literature, hopefully. We all know how to make our own decisions as clinicians. And there should be some protection in medical communities talking amongst each other. Now, when you're talking with the general public, absolutely, yes, I can see that. But you're right, structure function claims are protected. It's whenever you link things to disease that you have the bigger problems. And, you know, so here's some IV protocols. We'll just send you the link. This whole presentation is an online link. We can have it up for a few days. If you want to watch it, you're welcome. There's already embedded videos in there. I mean, I haven't even looked at this since end of March, early April, whenever we did it. So, but we did it because we got, here's your vitamin, here's your IV protocol. These are very basic, very inexpensive. You could use other things. And then you have your titration with quercetin for people who are more severe, if they want to go IV with it. And then here you have your nebulizer. And it's just really simple. It's 1 cc quercetin of a cyclodextrin quercetin, 1 cc N-acetylcysteine. And I use 1 cc of the 30 parts per million silver that Keith, and I like it as an we called it an antibacteriostatic or viral static agent because it's almost like bacteriostatic water, right? Things don't grow in silver. They tend to be a very good, of course, though, FDA, I wouldn't claim anything on any of this, but this is has worked 100% of the time. We've had no deaths, and it's very inexpensive. This whole protocol of the breathing treatment, it's like $17 a treatment. So significantly cheaper than, what is it, $11,000 for hospital admission and $33,000 for a ventilator. So we don't win in the financial area. It's a lot cheaper. The oral is 20 cents a pill-ish or something like that. So you guys are welcome, you don't have to use these, but, I like quercetin even beyond viral because of its anti-cancer properties, phytochemical properties, and histamine properties. And it's very benign, gentle, and you can almost use it with I mean, I wouldn't use it in infants, but they don't need anything anyways. Pregnancy, I don't have great data, but I would say mainly with anybody else, teenagers, young adults, all the way up to your elderly, and that's good. You have good cardiovascular stuff with it. So I'll leave room because I don't want to. But this is up. If you guys want this link, it's a link on Articulate, which is one of those special services we have, and we can send it. You can share it, Judy, to whoever asks. If they send you a request, feel free to share the link with them. And you're welcome to, if you need help, contact us. We're here. Our pharmacy, just to give you guys a little background. So this is the pharmacy. We're in Scottsdale, Arizona. This is our pharmacy. We're building another one about 25 minutes away from here to facilitate other states, but we don't really specialize in COVID medication at all. We focus on targeted integrative agents for cancer and autoimmune diseases, and we supply doctors like Dr. I don't want to mispronounce your last name, but Halisa, that do integrative care, use integrated combinations. We have several thousand of them that we provide medications to by prescription only. And then here's our medical center, and you're welcome to go to Invita and learn more about what we do with oncology, and our treatment protocols are not well listed because we customize them based on a whole series of genetic testing and other algorithms we use. We've been doing it for 20 years, and I'm very happy with our results. Our data right now is being looked at by some major insurance companies. We killed MD Anderson, we squashed Mayo Clinic. Because all the patients we see, and I don't want to offend anybody, they've already failed all these other institutions. And it's because a lot of the care is protocol care and it's not really driven on specific targets. So we've had very good results. I do a lot of the R&D for our organization, but we have great physicians, MDs, DOs, naturopaths, pharmacists, chemists on our team. We've got right now our team so this tells you how much we've grown. Already since I built this, we're at 150 people. So, we're small, we're not a big institution, but we're up here. And if you ever come to Scottsdale, especially Dr. Stein, I know you're supposed to come here eventually. You guys are welcome to tour our facility and our pharmacy and kind of get an idea of our operation.
Just to tell you, at this point, New York State bans you going to 38 states, which includes Arizona. I have quarantine.
You have a Democrat who's running the state. I'm lucky they don't let you outside your house without an oxygen tank.
Well, it just as a nice way of summing up, I suspect strongly that COVID will be cured one day after the election.
One day, huh? Like maybe 30?
One day. It'll be a miracle. It'll be a miracle. There will be an announcement that the cure has been found.
Yeah.
There was a question for, I think, Dr. Okasana. Do you want to bring up some of those stuff? That was
so again, Dr. Okasana, I'm a family medicine physician, and I'm a hospitalist who has actually had the great fortune of being on the COVID front lines. So Dr. Prado, this is Prato, right? That's this is very interesting. And I'm definitely a little more straight-laced medicine than integrative. But I do have some background in some integrative stuff with my training, so I definitely know some of these things as well. So that's a welcome thing there. I guess I think it is a very interesting thing, and I'm definitely looking forward to really being able to see some studies with it, because it does look truly interesting. It does look like something promising.
You can Google, and if you have some time, and I didn't bring it here. We also published a paper in 2014 on quercetin and all its mechanisms, and it was a peer-reviewed paper on a series of papers. I can send that to you, and it's more for oncology and all its other uses. But that diagram that I showed, again, we built these a while ago. But this diagram we showed here, some of the for the sake of presentations, there's a lot of published literature in every one of these categories. And this is just a quick summary. And what you're talking about around the world, you'll find literally hundreds and hundreds of papers. Quercetin's been around for a long time, and it's been on a dietary supplement list as a safe dietary supplement, at least orally, for many years. The unfortunate thing is with any new agent, right, that you don't have a USP monograph. This is a dietary monograph, and you don't have a drug approval on for any specific indication. But around the world, you have a lot of studies, particularly in Asia, Europe. There's a lot. In Italy, it's Quercetin. So everywhere you go, they just change the last name, and it's the same agent. And you're welcome to Google it, look at it. But quercetin's in food. It's commonly found in onions, apples, if you like quinoa. You know, so you're going to find these, but you don't get them at the doses where you need them at medicinal levels. If you give them at too low of a millimole, if you will, low doses, it doesn't have that same aggressive mechanism.
Right.
It's all dose related, just like hydroxychloroquine. If you give the wrong dose, you're going to hurt somebody, as some of the studies show. If you give the right dose, you're going to less chances of side effects if you give lower doses.
Fair enough. Well, I mean, I guess the more interesting thing, and of course, you know, it's like the taboo of doing nebulization, and now this protocol has like the nebulization component, and I like the idea of course doing it outside. I guess the question would be, how can we safely do it within 4 walls of a facility? Because
I'll let Stein take over the answer to that, because he was working that out for his hospital team. You want to share what they were talking about?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
The question was, how do you nebulize in the constraint of a hospital?
Well, I think the one solution that we potentially came up with is you did it out literally in the driveway next to the ED. You know, there was some option of, you know, maybe putting up a tent and further isolating people, but the degree of paranoia among the respiratory staff and the regular hospital staff, it really was quite daunting. And you know, I think one of the very interesting thing is, and Adi, I don't know if you had the same experience, but being on the front lines, I totally expected to turn positive. But with all that patient exposure, I never did. So either PPE works, or, you know, taking a bunch of preventive medications and over-the-counter agents might be helpful, without elaborating further. But you know, to date, I've maintained a negative status and feel wonderful. You know, thank God. So
that I have to agree. That's wonderful. Maybe you do have the cure. I'm very surprised at the negative response to vitamin D. Vitamin D is known to be effective in tuberculosis, as is sunlight. And then postmenopausal women are always being checked to see their vitamin D levels, since so many of us have very low levels of vitamin D. So I can't see why there would be such a pushback on that.
You know, I agree. It's inexplicable. I mean, the data on influenza, which Dino mentioned, that they've been randomized, or not randomized trials, but prospective observational trials, suggesting that if you were vitamin D deficient versus sufficient, you had a 50% greater chance of developing influenza. And the COVID data is similar. The outcomes are much worse. And even in Southern Europe, where presumably you have more sunshine, ironically, the older folks stayed indoors and were vitamin D deficient. And those who were vitamin D deficient had much worse outcomes as compared to those who were vitamin D sufficient. What hasn't been proven, I have to admit, is if you supplement vitamin D sort of acutely, do you get a better outcome? Admittedly, that's...
Well, there's some complications to that, because a lot of people have VDR SNP issues. So even though they're taking D, they're just not absorbing it. We use it in our oncology protocols. We do something called the vitamin D chokeout protocol, which is actually high levels of injections while we look at parathyroid and other things to get it to the higher levels quickly. But patients that are deficient can sometimes have genetic issues, and who knows when the data comes back. I think we're gonna, honestly, the way this thing has been treated is a disaster. If anybody, I know, and everybody says, well, I'm not familiar, I haven't heard, but even if they don't know this, you've heard of vitamin C, vitamin D, and zinc. What if you just did those 3 things that there really isn't that much controversy on? I hope there isn't with D. D's been everywhere, I mean, cardiac risk factor, et cetera. I think, you know, zinc, I don't think there's much to argue on zinc. Zinc has been well known. I mean, people take zinc lozenges when they have sore throats. It's been around for a long time. So I'm with you, Dr. Grossman. I think the D shouldn't have been argued. I think other things, but we're not in a logical environment right now. We are in an it's nothing about what's going on is logical. It's like the Twilight Zone. Doctors don't count. There's politics leading the way, and unfortunately, people die. And I just want to, you know, I just trying to make sure that it's none of the people around us in our community. We're doing the best we can, but currently our pharmacy is able to fill prescriptions in New York and not New Jersey. just FYI, because we are not licensed in New Jersey, but we are in New York City. But you can see zinc. So if I were to look at my top my recommendations, I would have quercetin and zinc. You could add D, I would add A in a mixed carotenoids, very effective. C, you could do a lot of things. You could do beta glucans, you could do, which are mushrooms, right? Those immune modulators, arabinogalactan. We can go on. I mean, I could give you 50 things and they're all great, but cost effectively, and these tend to be more virus specific for COVID. But there's other things you can do. I was talking to Dr. Hollisai, methylene blue, melatonin. I mean, you can go on and on. There's a lot you can do. There's a lot of data there. And acetylcysteine, you know, do we know orally how effective? NAC is very good for a number of immune modulatory, but mainly it's an antioxidant. It's a glutathione enhancer, selenium. So honestly, I don't know why we've been prevented from giving people integrative options. I am not a biased person. We use chemotherapy, we use all kinds of medication. I just use what works. I try to be unbiased and I let the clinical experience guide the way. If people are getting better, my old motto is don't change it, especially in oncology when we're helping people and they're moving into remission. Don't change the protocol because it's working. Take it all the way home. And that's what we do here. When we saw this working, we've been using it on everybody. Haven't had one case not respond and not one case die. And anybody who called us early enough never even went to the hospital. Whether that's good or bad, I think that's something. And I think sure, clinical studies need to be done, but we didn't invent this, Dr. Grossman. It's out there. It's being studied by other people. It's out there. So you can use it. It's very cheap. What is it, like 20 cents a pill? You know, so for the cost of $20, you too can try this in your own house. And
You too.
You too can do it. It's very cheap.
Yeah, maybe we could do it. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe it's too cheap.
Yeah. Honestly, we didn't fit with the White House's billions that have been passed out to all these big pharmas. Obviously, we're kind of like the flies in the room. Get out of the way.
Get out of the way.
Well, as long as you're telling to the people that it's okay to go ahead with your vaccine and take your antiviral and social distancing and wearing the mask, all of these things needs to be added, because the regulatory is here in this room, or when they hear that you're talking also with things that the big pharma wants you to tell, you know, what they want to hear, and you add it together, I think it's better.
Yeah.
So yes, we'll emphasize on social distancing, wearing masks.
Well, we can call this adjunctive care if that makes you feel any better. It's adjuvant to whatever else. If you want to give a Z-Pak, you could also give hydroxychloroquine. You could give remdesivir, whatever you like, and use it adjuvantly, because there's no adverse events doing that. So
yeah, so that's what they want to hear. So in this meeting too, we need to emphasize on the big pharma products is something, it's a mainstream, still you need to do it, but at the same time, whatever we recommend as an integrative medicine, that is an adjunct. I think when you present it that way as a package, I think that they feel better. They feel that, you know, you're not telling people, oh, you don't need to take vaccine, just take vitamin C. That's where they get irritated. That's what they expect.
I think it's also fair for all of us to discuss that even when the vaccines come out, and hopefully they're very good and helpful, maybe it's going to help, I would guess 40 or 50%, like influenza. It's not effective on everyone. There's still communities that don't benefit from the influenza vaccine. That's been proven. So there's always going to be a cohort that for whatever reason can't do a vaccine or doesn't respond to it, doesn't have antibodies or whatever. So we do need options. And I would say you would use the standard measures first. And if those fails, then consider adjuvants.
Yeah, I think it's important. You know, I agree with Dr. Halasa. I think it's just important to just kind of say, hey, you know, these are things we think they help. Put it in perspective. I mean, this is what I do whenever the very few integrative options I give people, and I'm like, look, this has been seen to be somewhat effective. Not promising anything. There are no promises. It's not harmful, at least. So yeah, just do that and kind of see where things go. And I think no one really can pursue you over that. I think that, you know, no one can say anything against that. And also getting the buy-in with the patient, and like, you know, I didn't say it's a cure. I didn't say it's anything. I'm just saying it may be helpful. You can try it if you want to. If they agree, they agreed. Okay, well, there was consent. So I think that's probably.
I just think it's ludicrous though if we do nothing. So whatever you do, you can nebulize a steroid, whatever you want to do, but doing nothing is not acceptable. And waiting for people to get later in disease to treat them, to me, doesn't make any sense. That's just my opinion.
Well, I just want to, really reinforce what you're saying, and that is, all the scientific medical trial effort is on late disease. Those who have complicated COVID, pneumonia, etc. So everything from the remdesivir, tocilizumab, for that matter, even the convalescent serum, dexamethasone. These are for all very, very ill people. So early in the disease, just with early symptomatic, upper respiratory symptoms, maybe a little shortness of breath, or even prevented. That's been a totally open, looked at space. And the FDA is still saying there's no, approved treatment for that. So in a sense, it's wide open for people to do what they think is in the best practice of medicine. You could prescribe vitamin C, vitamin D, and zinc. I mean, those are totally normal agents. Some of these other things that we're talking about today, certainly if you discuss that with your patients, between you and them, there should be no really controversy about that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so that's one of the things that we were mentioning earlier about the prevention, and that we're noticing the difference in the recoveries. There are more recoveries that we're noticing in India because their government has taken ownership of that, and they have activated preventative measures for everybody to apply Ayurvedic, just regular things that's in the house that you can use, so especially turmeric and things like that, that seem to work. I mean, it really seemed to work. There's a big difference between number of deaths versus number of people recovering from it.
Yeah, but I want to also say, because we're speaking to physicians here and not patients, that the FDA is not really positioned to handle this kind of problem. It's fair to say that, and I'm going to repeat what Dr. Grossman shared with me a while back on her first call, was it 4 months ago or whatever, they are not a wartime organization. They are great for peacetime studies, but when you're dealing with the patients that come into a hospital that are dying, and oftentimes we can't do anything, or our hands are tied, I have a moral problem with that, because the whole reason I'm in healthcare, and I know liability, yes, I've heard it, and we consent forms, but what I would have really appreciated from the White House, even though I think for the most part they're doing the best they can, is an executive order that would have prevented patients from suing doctors for the treatment of COVID. And the second executive order would have been to allow pharmacies and doctors to work across state lines to help their patients. And if they did have good results, they would report it to some sort of White House commission. That never happened. When the FDA became the main go-to for this, they became so inundated. And we know because our FDA attorneys were in contact. They had so many people putting in studies, drugs that people couldn't get past anywhere. Everything was thrown, COVID studies. And in fact, some of them weren't even looked at. So in the meantime, people are dying. They don't know what's happening behind the scenes, but politically, we're not set up for this type of situation. And we've almost said in America, doctors don't count. Practice of medicine doesn't count. You're afraid to say vitamin D with your patient. This is not a good environment. The environment needs to be, look, I can't guarantee you any of this is going to work. That's honest. But here are some things you can try while we're waiting for your test to come back. Oh, if they work, great. If they don't, we haven't lost anything. But what if we did all that I said and we saved one life, one of all the thousands that died, it was worth it, because human life is that valuable. One life. I'm not saying it saved everybody, it saved one. It was all worth it. So I just want to emphasize that as physicians, that that's a hard thing. That's a hard pill to swallow when practice of medicine is taken away from you, and you almost have to do what you're supposed to do and be quiet. I have a hard time with that.
Well, the problem is everybody's scared of liability. You know that you'll do the best for the patient, and when you don't have a good result, the patient's not going to sue you, but you can be sure his family will.
Yeah.
Because unfortunately, they see their opportunity has come.
That's why an executive order preventing lawsuit for the treatment of COVID would have been.
Exactly. Under these circumstances,
yes.
And you could even have a division or group to oversee the therapy.
Right.
But it has to be like we're at war, emergency, not like the FDA who says about even the plasma, well, we can't come out with a real decision It seems to work, but it's anecdotal.
If you can't get that passed, we're all in trouble.
Well, they can't. I mean, Julie could tell you the effort we made to try to get plasma for a patient, and it was pulling teeth from going to the president of the hospital and getting his approval, and then going to the blood bank and trying to get her approval, which at the last minute, she got worried about liability.
Yeah, see, in fairness to the FDA, they're just not equipped for this. I mean, they've all been inundated too. At all their offices and all their divisions, they're overwhelmed. They've got only so many people. They've pulled everybody in. They're doing the best they can too. And I think
I agree they are,
just
but
not set up for it.
So
Yes.
it was that story was somewhere in March 20th through 27th, before the convalescent plasma protocol that was published by FDA on March 24th. And I'm looking at him. This is something that's normally done in any hospital. And why do we need the blood bank to be the choking point? And yes, someone who wants the patent on a certain process is the blood bank. So there's so many nuances that we run into early on within the COVID space that is tripping. You cannot just go do the right thing the right way, the way you need to help your patient pretty fast. It really is, our system is broken. Obviously, we all accept that healthcare system is broken, but it really brought that out. I know that William had a lot of questions and comments. Rather than me trying to read from the side, I did unmute you, William. Feel free to, mention what you wanted to say, because you had a few comments.
Sure thing, Ms. Vazay. So what I am is I'm an MPH, a master's degree in public health, and I also have a bachelor's in political science. So I'm very familiar with the differences in the areas of conflict, as well as from the policy standpoint. But I had a few questions related to if anyone has ever heard of a polypill. There was an article in the New England Journal of Medicine. I sent the link to the panelists about that. And also, I'm thinking that maybe we need to have physicians play a greater role as a set of advocates to change the corporate and legal environment to allow for better behavior change and better narrative and better responses, and ultimately change the behavior of bureaucracy, because that's what's needed to really have an effective triumph. Like, everything is just muddled in a Byzantine kind of like institution.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think you're spot on, William. You hit it right, the nail on the head. This is like archaic with all the technology we have in America and all the knowledge and the brilliant physicians and technology. The way we're approaching this is just archaic. And in all fairness, I think you're being in political science. I think this is very linked to politics. This is my personal opinion. This is we again walk away from medicine and we come back into politics. But the medicine stuff we can talk about. We can all have differing opinions on how there's many ways you can treat this disease. It's not a one treatment strategy. Whatever method you use, I think the difficult part is the hurdles on the political side.
Anybody else have any other comments? Because I know we're going to be hitting 8:15 in another 3 minutes. But Dr. Stein, I wanted to ask you, you're one of the people who actually see a lot more of the request for research coming through because of your role in the IRB side. Would you mind talking about a little bit about it, since, we have you on?
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. I mean, the first push, of course, was with remdesivir, where if you look at the basic science, it was repurposed from, I believe, Ebola, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it was Ebola.
The specific RNA polymerase inhibitor. And the COVID virus is an RNA virus. So that made sense. In vitro, there was activity. And there was, of course, a big push, big money to push that through. Everybody was desperate for anything. Everybody remembers that at that point in time, the only thing that was potentially available was hydroxychloroquine. So essentially everybody was going hydroxychloroquine as standard of care, ironically, at that point in time. And we now know that remdesivir is very modestly effective. It shortens hospital stay by a little bit. So now they're doing these new adaptive trials with remdesivir as the gold standard, albeit in hospitalized sick patients. It's an expensive treatment, about $3,200 per course, I understand. And there's a new trial, actually I wrote down what it's called, I-SPY, which is sponsored by NIH. As far as it goes, it's reasonable. They're piggybacking 6 other different agents on back of remdesivir and suggesting sort of A-B comparison, is it better? So the first one out of the gate is Senecroc, which is an anti-CCR2 and CCR5 receptor inhibitor. It's both anti-inflammatory and anti-fibrotic. It's been in late clinical trials in steatosis and NASH and liver disease. So that's, a reasonable choice.
Are you talking about losartan? Is the one that you're talking about? Is it losartan inhalation? I know there's a clinical trial about it.
It's a tablet. The generic is Senecroc. I don't know what the trade name is. So anyway, that's the first one that'll be compared against remdesivir. The next one will be Quercetin, which is a bradykinin antagonist, and that's FDA approved for hereditary angioedema. Then it'll be razuprotafib, which is a receptor-like protein tyrosine phosphatase inhibitor. And after that will be apremilast, which is FDA approved as a PDE4 inhibitor, and that inhibits TNF alpha. And that's approved for psoriatic arthritis. I will sort of point out as a side note, there is another drug in clinical trials that is a soluble TNF inhibitor, but because it's a very small company and the basic science, while pretty well established, was not well known to a number of reviewers, and they didn't want to do that. They much prefer these drugs like apremilast, which has a very large pharmaceutical backing, and to be fair, more human clinical data. So it's an interesting space. I would say that there's good science going on, but it's those pharma companies that can put huge amounts of effort, large amounts of funding, and to be sure, most large pharma's trials are very expensive, and you need deep pockets to do them. But again, all this emphasis is on late stage disease. So these are patients on 6 liters or more of oxygen. They have COVID pneumonia. So what we're interested in, and which is a huge empty space that's not really being addressed, is very early COVID disease. People with just viral symptoms, maybe a little bit of shortness of breath, but not so sick that they're admitted, or also prevention. But that's where that's the money is, because we've talked about potential treatments here that cost, pennies or maybe a few dollars. And if you could prevent somebody from being hospitalized, I know Yuki is our expert on this. Every hospitalization that's prevented saves thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars. And it's a shame that more effort isn't being put into those spaces. And I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, but the FDA is not interested in early stage of COVID-19. They are putting all their trials in the late stage, and that's why hydroxychloroquine did not work, because definitely it's not going to work.
That's correct. This case series data, which, by the way, case series is a totally appropriate form of medical scientific data. I mean, if you treat 1,000 patients or 10,000 patients, and very few end up hospitalized or dead, that's very convincing data. Yet the FDA is making the point that unless it's a randomized controlled trial, we're not going to accept it. But there are other legitimate forms of data, and for early COVID, particularly for hydroxychloroquine, I think the data is getting stronger and stronger and stronger. Yet, as pointed out, nobody's really testing the essential combination, which is hydroxychloroquine with zinc, or maybe it's quercetin with zinc or something else. But zinc is an essential component of any early treatment strategy. So again, the wrong questions are being asked, in my opinion.
China was suggesting using hydroxychloroquine for early COVID infections. That was their recommendation, but nobody picked it up. They were using it for late infection.
Right. So we saw it in the hospital. I apologize, there's some construction going on here. I had a big flood here. But
I'm in a conference. I'll call you back.
the hospitalized data in hydroxychloroquine was all in deathly ill patients. But some data even suggest even in that population, they did better on hydroxychloroquine. And there was a wonderful retrospective study out of NYU that suggested those on hydroxychloroquine plus zinc did dramatically better. And yet,
it's a zinc ionophore
study that's looked at that, but it was dramatic, 50% reduction in mortality. It was amazing.
Yeah, but that's because it's a zinc ionoform, and if you don't know your mechanism of action, you're going to miss the boat on that on that drug. And zinc is so cheap. It's very cheap. I mean, we could order a ton of it at nothing. It's very cheap.
Well, because the big pharma operates on monotherapy, they don't do multi-therapy. So that's very important to know. And they operate on big money and drugs out of the blue or resurfacing other drugs for other clinical applications.
Like
but it has to
off-label.
be monotherapy and has to be clinical trials, which is blind.
Well, you know,
trials.
from experience, most virals don't work well on monotherapy because there's a number of, you know, if you think of antiviral care linked to your immune system, people have different glitches in their immune system, you know, meaning some person might respond really well with vitamin D, another person might need more of something else because it's maybe related to their own genomics, their own deficiencies, their own immune system. So yes, I get you're absolutely right. They want a monotherapy, but clinically, from clinical experience, what we see works really well is combination. It works best.
Right, but that's business. I'm talking about business talking. They want monotherapy. They want one drug so they can make money out of it. If you do it in combinations, then they say which one is drug is effective. They don't know, and then they say, well, your trial, we don't know which one is effective here. And then how those companies going to make money and how they're going to, you know, especially they spend lots of money.
Yeah, I mean,
so it's politics and business.
Yeah, it is, especially with different drug companies trying to work together. That's a problem, and that's why combination therapy isn't very popular.
No, but I also think, if, like I mentioned earlier, executive order to prevent physicians from being sued, open up state lines for pharmacies, and then doctors would send any sensible protocols to the White House, not the FDA. And, you know, I think we would have seen solutions in weeks of the onset of this. And we would have had like a online government, you know, website that just pointed out combinations that were helping people. You know, again, if people are already dying, and like you said, Daniel, many of those people on ventilators were already destined to die. At that point, what do we have to lose, right? They're already dying. Let's do what we can to save their life. But it's water under the bridge. I think the infection has to make its way through. The R naught of this is like 3, so it's, you know, 2.5, 3. It spreads pretty quick. You know, but again, the answer is not, in my opinion, and I don't know if what you guys think, but it's not testing everybody. It's having good prophylactic care, managing the right cases, get the kids back to school. They're having a lot of issues with depression and sadness. Then we got a whole other psychological drug issues, and this is a mess. And frankly, you know, for whatever it's worth, it's become more of a political issue to me than medical because we have so many good tools. The answer to me is get the kids back to school. Let's protect the high-risk population with prophylactic care. Let the physicians untie their hands so they can treat before they even test. I know that sounds crazy, but I think if you use non-toxic strategies, even if it's a low-dose hydroxychloroquine and zinc, treat before you run the test, because if someone's oncoming with this disease and you're waiting 3 to 4 days, that is a big difference in the disease.
That's too long, much too long.
That's my opinion. I mean, and again, if the doctors could have their hands untied and they could do what they do best, I think the death rates would drop significantly. They're already dropping, but they would drop even more.
Well, I think we understand more about the infection, and that's why it's dropping. I mean, I think that you have to stratify the disease also. You have to look at those that are, you know, doing well with the disease, so they do need some, let's say, oral therapy to help them along. People who are sort of moderate but need a boost, and those who are really severely ill for whatever reason. And they're the type of people who need plasma therapy. That's right. ECMO, if they're young and really sick, their kidneys are blown, ECMO will work.
Yeah, power of oxygen versus depriving them of it.
Yes, exactly.
Crazy,
exactly.
Crazy what we see. We're going to look back
I will
at
say that, you know, one of the success stories in this whole saga is the understanding that there's this microangiopathy. So now we're all using heavy anticoagulation.
Right.
Because that was a huge morbidity and mortality. But that still doesn't really stop the underlying disease process. It just sort of moderates it. So the best, ironically, that we have is dexamethasone. Ironic that cheap dexamethasone steroids, you know, gives you better outcomes than remdesivir, right?
what was the doctor in Texas that had come out? You guys saw that?
Oh,
It was
yes.
all over YouTube.
Right.
Oh,
The
yeah.
He had a
budesonide,
respiratory.
right?
It was like, what was that? It was like an asthmatic, right? What drug
It
was
was budesonide, I
it?
believe.
Budesonide, that's right. And do you know how fast he got hit by the Texas Medical Board for even making those statements? It was crazy. That poor guy. He came out. He thought he had something great. He went and shared it on the local news, and I heard he got hit very hard by the local medical board. So to me, that's ludicrous. That's not good medicine. And these are drugs that are well known. Forget quercetin. Quercetin is novel to a lot of people that aren't in integrative care, but forget that. Just stick with the drugs you know, and you still can't use them off label. Where is the practice of medicine in all of this? The freedom for a doctor to do what he thinks or she thinks could help their patients. I mean, that's the ultimate.
It's gone. You can't do that anymore. No, it's gone.
So your hands are tied, you know, because now most physicians are part of some sort of institution, or they're owned by a hospital system. So you are asked to do a certain way and follow a certain protocol. So they're limited in what they are allowed to do. And, you know, and there are all these liability issues. So the physicians who stayed as independent, who have a bit more flexibility to look beyond just what is being told to what is actually working, we have been seeing them a lot. They don't talk about what they do. They just do what they need to do. They have people go to them because they hear about it, you know, different ways of sending them to the right path. I mean, even we direct them that way. And that is the only thing you can do to stay, you know, not happen what happened to the Texas physician or other things we have heard happening in California and other places. Because if you try to go and be very clear about what you can do and the results are, it impacts other people's or other.
Wasn't there a group? What was the name of the group that went to the White House on hydroxychloroquine that got shut off of Facebook? American Surgeons, American Physicians and Surgeons. Who was that group? Anybody know? There was a group that went to.
I do remember. I remember who they were.
They were a big group. There's thousands of them. They're part of the American surgeons and physicians group, and they were a lot of them out of California, UCLA, good institutions, and they were very upset that they weren't able to get their prescriptions filled. So they would write a script for hydroxychloroquine, and the pharmacists were being told by the governor not to fill it. Have you ever heard of this crap? Sorry.
Yes, we have.
It's crazy. How does a governor and their assistant know more than a practicing physician who may want to help their patient? I don't know. I don't get this.
So, you know, this is where we have to have a lawyer on hand to deal with all these things. It's because there are other interests who's guiding them, and multiple people are giving different directions possibly. And there's always, the lobbyists and other entities who kind of work in the background to influence so that things go a certain direction. Unfortunately, that is the nature of the beast in this industry. And thank you very much, Dr. Prato, Dr.
Well, you're
Stein.
welcome. Judy, enjoy your vacation. You look like you're on a beautiful beach.
This is it. In 9/11, dust exposure, poor immunity, I don't go out. This has been like this for 6 months, okay? March 8th. And what did me, and I think Dr. Stein was in there. I was at the IHM conference in February. I think I got exposed and probably had it because I had to go and a few other people I attended that with, they did all tell me that they had symptoms. Now, in hindsight, it was in New York City. Even if that's the case, I have poor immunity. No matter what, I'm out of it and I'm at risk again. So, 3 months, that was all you get out of it anyway. But thank you, everybody. I really appreciate it and look forward to doing some interesting things that would make a difference.
Well, I wish you all the best of luck. God bless you all. And if you need any help or just want to talk about integrative medicine, we're happy to help you.